From the time I was 7 years old until I was 14, I lived in a little town in North Carolina called Windsor. I hated it. Ultimately, I was glad to leave. But as a writer, I find I return to Windsor again and again in my short stories. I am trying to understand my grandmother, who loved that place as much as I despised it. For all the years she farmed from a 3-room frame house, she longed for a brick house in Windsor. I am trying to understand my mother and father, who drank beer and danced slow in a hole in the wall on the outskirts of that town, and who returned to it as home years after we should have been done with that place. When I return to Windsor, I am searching for the story of their lives, what it was like to be Black, poor, and uneducated, but militantly alive in that segregated cotton and tobacco town. Each time I read a story by Edward P. Jones, I understand that time better. This is because Edward Jones asks the questions I wish I'd known to ask my grandmother and my father before they left this life. Mr. Jones also knows the answers. In the story, A Poor Guatemalan Dreams of a Downtown in Peru, the Reverend Mrs. Campbell writes to Arlene, "Despite all that has happened to you, you are, in the end, no better than all the rest of us, who must fight to stay afloat. We want, we rage, we desire, we fail, we succeed, we wait in that, we stand in that long, long line." I go back to Windsor to understand how my grandparents and parents stayed afloat and kept patience and faith as they waited in so many long, long lines. I return over and over to the work of Edward P. Jones for the same reason. Mr. Jones.
Told to read about 10 to 15 minutes, and I always worry that I will go over the time that they give me. I was in Florida once, Miami, and I didn't know I was going over, but I was, and this lady stood up and embarrassed me to no end, so I'm always afraid when I stand up like this. I'll read the beginning of a story called The Devil Swims Across the Anacostia River. Some 14 years after her grandmother walked out into the Atlantic Ocean on her way to heaven, Laverne Shepherd went into the safe way on Good Oak Road southeast, and for the first time came face to face with the devil. That morning in the store, she had, like so many times before, taken a shopping cart from just inside the door and maneuvered it to the aisle farthest to the left. She neared a face-high display of canned pinto beans and glanced at a short shopping list after she took it from her sweater pocket. And when she looked up from the list of 4 or so items, the devil was before her. She stopped, not out of fear, but because to go any farther would have been running into him with the cart. "Himself been studying you," the devil said. Laverne looked down at the wedding ring with a hand resting on the cart's handle, and when she raised her eyes, the devil was taking off his hat in that dramatic way men did in old movies to impress women who needed railroad impressing. The devil was dressed in a splendid gray gabardine suit, and down to the metal rods of the empty cart, Laverne could see that on feet small enough to belong to the little girl, he wore 2-tone black and white shoes. The knot of his purple tie was situated just so to the left of his Adam's apple, as if he addressed himself without the benefit of a mirror. There was an almost boyish quality to the officer knot, and for a moment Laverne thought it would have been the most natural thing in the world for a woman, any woman, to reach over and center the knot and end the whole gesture with a final tap of the finger on the knot. "There, that'll do you for a while." The tie was held in place against his white shirt with a ruby tie clip about the size of a candy fireball. "Himself been studying you," the devil said again, now smiling. All the teeth in his head were perfect, exquisite white marbles, that were an artwork of their own. A woman could spend all day and part of the next just laying about looking at them. Both her grandmothers had come to know the devil so well that he, in all his guises, called them always by their childhood nicknames. At various times in her life, Laverne's grandmothers had tried to tell her how she would know the devil that first time. It will be, they'd explained as best they could, the way you know that you're hungry or that you're thirsty. The body will say it and you will take it as gospel. But they had not told her what to say, what to do, whether to run or go forward and attack him with the fury of an angel doing God's work. Once more the devil said himself would study you. He came toward her, and as he did, he lowered the arm with the hat down his side. The fedora was the same pleasing gray as his gabardine suit. The devil himself was the color of an everyday brown paper bag. He rested a hand on the side of the cart, less than a foot from where her wedding room hand was resting, and turned down and smiled a few degrees, turned it down in disappointment, as if he'd come upon a long-lost friend, and the friend had denied knowing him. What? Vern said, what? She was 9 weeks pregnant with her second child, happy in all things, happy in her 25th year of life. The devil said, himself come all his way, come all the way across the river, swim all the way across that Anacostia, himself swim all that way to say good morning and say, how you do? She was still not afraid, but looked about, mostly with a strange wonder that they were at last together, and together in such an odd and bright place of food and people and things to clean the kitchen floor with. The sign on the display of canned pinto beans said 8 for $1. It occurred to Laverne that might be a particularly good price, but she could not remember if her husband or son liked pinto beans. It was when she looked back at the devil that the smell of him came drifting her way, a non-threatening fragrance that didn't mind taking all the time it needed to get to her. It was a wonderful, though subtle cologne that for Laverne simply said everything good about men. Himself and studying you, the devil said, quietly now, as if he were sharing the great secret of her life. Laverne stepped away from the devil in the cart and walked uneasily out of the Safeway. She made her way a block and a half up Good Oak Road, and on a bench in front of Cleopatra's Hair Emporium, she sat, the crumpled shopping list in her left hand resting on the green bench. She was back in the world, back in life, and was so glad that she felt like reaching out and touching a body or two passing by Cleopatra's Hair Emporium. 2 women went into Cleopatra's, and one of the women was saying she really wanted some bangs, but her companion told her bangs would make her face look fat. But I really want them bangs, the first woman insisted before they closed the door to the emporium. Laverne crossed her legs and with the tips of her fingers rearranged her skirt down over her legs. Himself and studying you. For the 3rd time that morning, she wished she had not stopped smoking. It was near about 12 o'clock. She considered calling her mother, her mother's wealthy mother, who had known the devil mostly in the disguise of an old woman for nearly 60 years. She turned her head and looked into the window of the beauty parlor. The woman who wanted the bangs was being seated in a chair 2 seats from the window. Laverne had, after the birth of her son, tried to do good to put off as long as possible this day, the day of meeting the devil, sending money to the Salvation Army, going to church every week until all that singing and preaching began to depress her. But all that good had not put off this day. She had paid little attention to the story that the devil had a special thing for the women on both sides of her family, a thing born with Eve. It was said that all the women in her family had the answer to a riddle that would make the devil the king of heaven. All he had to do was pose the riddle in the right way to the right woman, alive or dead, and the answer would send God tumbling from his throne and down to the narrow perch the devil had been assigned to for all history. Now, the devil had knocked at her door. Laverne took the shopping list and put it back in her sweater pocket and patted the pocket.